Hello everyone, back checking in today's second video. So we've already done the February month-ahead forecast, which you can find on the month-ahead forecast page. You get to that via the button on the homepage that will take you there. So it's a very complicated forecast for February this year because the long-range model, CFS V2 and Beijing Climate Centre, are very much predicting that we're going to have a bit of an Atlantic onslaught. They want to have the Atlantic in control, particularly in terms of the CFS-V2. That means a very mild and wet month is being signalled. However, we don't think that is the way it's going to play out. There will be some mild wet weather this month, and it certainly is not totally impossible, but it might be a very mild Atlantic-driven month. But really, I think we're going to get more sort of colder interludes coming along as well, which will offset these milder periods, and that makes it for quite a complicated month. But if you want to know more about it, I'll let you look at that at your own leisure. This is going to have a look at the weather for the next week to 10 days. This takes us around the 12th of February. So we've had the stratospheric one, we've got a bit of news on that. And next week, we've got the high pressure building up over Scandinavia. It's going to try and get winds into the east and pull some bitterly cold air out of the continent. The complication is, as always, the Atlantic Ocean, because that's in a buoyant mood as well at the moment, and it's going to be a case of the irresistible force meant to be a movable object next week. I'm going to see which one comes out on top in terms of today's models. Anyway, this really is on a knife edge, as it always is, really, when we are talking about high pressure over Scandinavia versus the Atlantic. We'll always be on a knife edge, just because of our position in the world. We are perched on the edge of Europe, so we've got cold landmass on one side, and then on the other side, we've got that mild Atlantic Ocean, and we always struggle to get these cold easterly winds going. But when they do get in, they can last a very long time. That's the funny thing, because when it all sets up and it locks in, then you can stay locked into it for quite a while. But it's just getting to it that is always very, very difficult. So I'll get on with the detail in a second. Before I get on with that, just say about the ads. There's links to articles on all the pages. Have a browse, free widgets, and click through the links. If there's any articles that are interesting, you help us pay for the website. And thanks very much for doing that. Starting off with the temperature at 10 HPA, then we've been looking at this a lot over the past 2 or 3 weeks. So we had the stratospheric warming, which occurred over the weekend and in the start of this week. There it is. That was the peak of the stratospheric warming. We're dropping down a little bit now in terms of the temperature at 10 HPA, but still at a very high level, still very significantly above the average in terms of the stratospheric temperature at this time of year. It's also moving down to 30 HPA now. You remember I said that we need to have an effect on the weather. We need to get this warmth down into the troposphere. We need the troposphere to warm up. So one of the ways that we see that that's happening is the temperature a bit lower down at 30 HPA in the stratosphere, and that did rise up quite a bit yesterday. There we go. We've peaked again there somewhere just under or just over minus 14 degrees Celsius. So a fairly significant stratospheric warming has taken place. Now, I wasn't sure whether this would quite reach the threshold of the sudden stratospheric warming. There's a very strict definition of a sudden stratospheric warming, which is that you have to turn the zonal winds negative. You have to go into reverse with the zonal winds. So essentially, you have to go from westerlies to easterlies. We actually just did that by the skin of our teeth yesterday at 10 HPA. So this is the temperature yesterday with the E70F from the University of Berlin website at 10 HPA. You see that very much a case of warm temperatures there still at 10 HPA. We know that is correct. I want you to look down here. I'll zoom in a little bit. It's hard to make it out. So if we go down to the bottom of this chart, just there, those red numbers, they tell us, particularly the one on the bottom, minus 0.1 ms, that tells us that by just 0.1, we did go negative yesterday. So technically, we have had a sudden stratospheric warming, but it's so close to not being a sudden stratospheric warming, to still being positivity, that I think basically say it's been a very significant warming miss, and probably best leave it at that, because it may well be that this is revised a little bit in a few days' time. I'm not sure if it will be or not, and that might be reduced back into a very minutely sort of positive number. But as it stands at the moment, anyway, this is probably the weakest sudden stratospheric warming on record, albeit it is a significant warming that has taken place within the stratosphere. But in terms of an actual defined sudden stratospheric warming, it's hard to see that you could get much weaker than that. But we just about did it yesterday. And on this chart we can see again that we did, it's virtually on neutral, sort of that area just there. The blue line here shows us the zonal winds, and they did drop down at 10 HPA to around neutral. We know we just actually went 0.1 onto the negative side. Very, very close on the thing between that and staying positive. In terms of 30 HPA, well, nowhere near going negative, with the zonal wind at 30 HPA. So it's been a significant warming that has occurred in the stratosphere at 10 HPA, probably just about reaching an actual defined sudden stratospheric warming. And now we've just got to wait and see what the impacts of this are. So we're going to wait and see, essentially, whether this does set up blocking. We know again the Scandinavian high being predicted by the models for next week. Whether that is in cause, and that's being caused by the sudden stratospheric warming or by the stratospheric warming, or whether it's just the fact that the polar vortex is weakening a little bit because of this stratospheric warming, and that's allowing the high pressure to build up over Scandinavia. We can't really say. It's always very difficult to come out with cause and effect with these things. So we're just going to have to wait and see where that warming takes us into February. Now, the Arctic oscillation is trending negative. We've been looking at this quite a bit over the past few days, particularly to see whether this begins to show a response to the stratospheric warming. This is where we are right now, positive with the Arctic oscillation. You see that the red lines here, which is in each individual member of the GFS ensembles, most of those are going into negative territory. Some of them are doing a bit of a crash as well as we head up towards the middle part of February. So remember, this is an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere. It's not driving anything, but the fact that this is going negative is telling us that a lot of the GFS ensemble members are building high pressure somewhere in the northern latitude. I would suspect most of them are doing it around Scandinavia. But this could again be in response to that stratospheric warming, or it could be the fact that the polar vortex is weakening and that allows the ridging to start to develop, particularly around Scandinavia, or it could be a coincidence. Again, we can't link one thing definitively to another thing, but we do know that when we get stratospheric warmings, particularly sudden stratospheric warmings, blocking tends to follow fairly shortly after. So it could well be that this stratospheric warming is having at least some impacts on the Arctic oscillation there. No sign of the North Atlantic oscillation going negative. Again, this is an index that's reflecting the state of the atmosphere, not driving anything. And in contrast to what's happening in the Arctic, the North Atlantic looks like it's staying positive up towards the middle part of February. And this is going to be a problem if we're going to get easterly winds and high pressure taking over from Scandinavia, because it means that the Atlantic, which, as I say, is in a buoyant phase at the moment, the Atlantic is going to be fighting against that blocking, and it could, in the end, it might be that the blocking is just broken down across Scandinavia and finishes up, pushed down into Central and Central Eastern Europe, and takes the cold air again down into the southeast of Europe through the Balkans, Greece, Turkey, which is what happened earlier in the winter. So to really guarantee, well, there's never a guarantee in the weather, but to really have a better chance of getting this high pressure going across Scandinavia, getting the winds into the east, we want to be seeing these red lines trending down in the North Atlantic along with the Arctic. So the GFS ensembles show this uncertainty up very, very clearly. These are the upper air temperature ensembles and precipitation ensembles for the next 2 weeks. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average. They're fairly straightforward for the rest of this week into weekend, into next week. We're going to be hovering. We're starting off mild and average, but we're going close to average through the weekend and into the start of next week. It's really from this point just here, which is the second half of next week, that we've got all of the uncertainty still. So there are several members, there's more of them than yesterday, interestingly. Several members of the GFS ensembles are bringing in some really cold weather from the east through the course of next week and into the second weekend of February. There are some ensemble members down here that are dropping into the freezer as well. They are quite severely cold ensemble members, almost certainly from the east. But again, you see that we also have several members of the GFS ensembles that are staying mild. So the trend line, which is the white line, that is hovering around average. It has reduced compared to where it was yesterday. So it's almost like we've got a 50-50 split now in the GFS ensembles, with about half of them going cold later next week and half of them staying on the milder side. And that's why the white line, the trend line, is actually reduced a little bit in terms of temperature. So although it's a 50-50 split, compared to yesterday, I think the GFS ensembles have moved more towards bringing in some really quite cold air later next week. So the GFS ensembles could be shifting a little bit onto the colder side. I think that has happened over the past 24 hours, albeit it is still more or less split 50-50. So temperature anomalies for the next week look like this. The east of Europe is starting to turn cold again. The easterly winds starting to drag bitterly cold air out of Russia into the east of Europe over the next week from the 2nd through 10th of February. But it looks like it's staying relatively mild out in the west. Remember, this is encompassing where we are now, which is mild. So I expect these to cool down over the next week. We're going to have to wait and see how much cold we get into the west of Europe. Precipitation anomalies show that the west of Europe is looking wetter than average. The east of Europe is looking drier than average. So here we go for Monday then with the GFS. We've got high pressure centred across Scandinavia. There it is, a big area of high pressure up there with a deep area of low pressure out in the Atlantic. So the low pressure is trying to bring in this westerly wind, the high pressure trying to bring in the easterly wind. Let battle commence. We go through to Tuesday, and that low pressure moves in on Tuesday, bringing a band of heavy rain late Monday and into Tuesday. That low pressure is then pushed down to the south, as it looks like this high pressure across Scandinavia is going to win this battle and get wind into the east. However, Wednesday, or I should say Thursday, next week, brings another low pressure system in off the Atlantic. Now that's starting to come up against cold air, so that could begin to get quite interesting in the north. Then that low pressure is stalling on Friday next week. There's a weather front that's strung out there. We are trying to draw in cold air from the east as well, so that could be quite interesting if it was to pan out like that. You wouldn't rule out the chance of some snow. That low pressure is eventually pushed down to the south as the high pressure does win the battle across Scandinavia, turns the winds into the east on Saturday the 11th, then into Sunday the 12th. We are then into an easterly wind with high pressure across Scandinavia seemingly winning the battle. ECWF for next week shows that on Monday again the high pressure is in over Scandinavia, low pressure is trying to come up from the Atlantic as well. Let battle commence. We go through to Tuesday, and it looks wet and windy on Tuesday. 1,045 millibar area of high pressure across Scandinavia is significant. That's a significant area of high pressure there. The low pressure stalls and begins to slip away to the southeast on Wednesday, and then into Thursday the high pressure looks like it's going to take over and get winds into the east for the second half of next week. And that's what happens by Friday the 10th. We are bringing in a cold east, albeit with a little bit of a southeasterly component, but a cold easterly wind is coming in through the second half of next week, and that takes us into what would be a cold weekend for the 11th and 12th of February. This low pressure is interesting. That's coming into cold air and could be bringing some snow. Again, the high pressure across Scandinavia does look quite significant. Now, there's no sign with these two operational runs of severe cold yet. We know that from the GFS ensembles, there is the possibility, there are ensemble members that do bring in some quite severe cold weather through the course of up to the middle part of February, albeit they are in the minority. So we can't either rule out severe cold, and we can't rule out staying mild, actually, from the Atlantic. It's one of those where it really is on a knife edge between what's going to happen. But I think the models are shifting, certainly the GFS ensembles are shifting more towards the colder side of things. So let's just wait and see where things are going to go next. I'm going to keep you posted, of course, as well as over the coming days as this pattern unfolds. Right, don't forget to check out February month ahead forecast if you'd like to do that. That's all for now, and thanks for watching.